Can you believe this? I bring my car in here for a friggin' oil change. I come back to pick it up and this is what I find. If I wanted service like this, I'd have had my oil change in the friggin' Bronx, for Christ's sakes. I started to dig into the rear axle here and I'm already thinking this is probably not the one we want to use. It's a little crusty on the outside. Look at how rotten these radius rods are. The whole seam is rotted out. Which, if that was the only issue, wouldn't be a huge deal, but that axle bell is really pitted, so I have a feeling there's probably more issues hiding with this thing, but we'll tear it apart anyway and just see what's in there and maybe salvage some parts off it. But I've got another rear end on a frame out back that I'm pretty sure is good, so we'll probably end up using that one. Well, my suspicions were correct. Look at this housing. It'd be a little hard to see, but I mean, there's almost nothing left of that. That is so wallowed out from worn out bushings and lack of grease. So these axle bells will become yet another set of jack stands. That one is, yeah, there's just nothing left of that. It's crazy. I'm sure it clunked a little bit. I decided to pull the plug on that other rear axle. Got it all apart, and it's just not worth the time. The axle bells are all rusty inside up in the top where there's been no oil on them for who knows how many years. Instead of trying to clean all that up, it's just a lot easier to go with this other axle. The spring mounts are also all blown out on that one. They're actually pretty nice on this one. I can just throw some new bushings in it and be done. So they're both 378s, so same gearing. Took this one apart. The bearings actually look really good in it. This is the spare axle I had out of another car. The bearings look good. The pinion bearing feels good. I'm going to pull that apart and just reset the preload on it because there's really no preload left. So we'll do that. I'll get this set back up in the housing with new gaskets and shimmed all up. And we should be good to go. Clean up the housing, throw some paint on it. We can try to figure out how to get some hydraulic brakes strapped to this. And should have a working rear end, hopefully. The pinion looks pretty good. The bearing feels good. I'm going to pull that race off and just have a look at it real quick, but I think it's alright. We'll reset the preload on it and clean up that housing. Throw it back in there and then we'll move on to the carrier. So a couple of quick things if you haven't messed with these before. There's an inner and an outer pinion bearing. So the pinion is actually stepped right here. So the shaft is two different sizes where these bearings sit. So that inner bearing is pressed on there. You're not going to be able to slide that off. The outer bearing is just a slight interference fit, so you can tap it off, kind of like I did. You can use a mallet and just tap on the race and it'll pull it right off because it's just barely held on there. Like I said, you're not going to do that with this one. This has to be pressed on and off. If you reuse your stuff, make sure your bearings go back in the same way. Don't flip this over and get it confused. But these look pretty good. I'll clean them up, double check them, but I don't see any issues. We should just be able to throw this back together, reset our preload on that, and sling it back in the housing there. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention. If you are using new bearings, buy Timken bearings. Do not buy the cheaper import ones because they're a different size. They will work in the carrier. They do not work in the pinion. This actually uses all four bearings are the same one. The two pinion and the two carrier bearings are the same bearing. However, they're a little bit thicker, those cheapo import ones. And it will put the pinion deeper into the housing and you will never get any sort of backlash. I fought with the last one I did for I don't know how long before I finally figured out that the bearings were not made correctly. So do yourself a favor, spend the extra money and buy Timken, or you're just going to fight with it and then have to buy them anyways. So. So here comes the fun part, trying to clean out these bells. If there's a bunch of gunk in there, especially if there's rust in there, that could be a huge pain. But even if there's just a little bit of dirt and some sludge and stuff, it's still kind of a pain because you really can't get down in there very well. So what I like to do is first take the axle seal out. The way to do that is I use a, 6-inch or whatever, 1/2-inch drive extension. Put the big end in there and you just catch into the seal. Hit it a couple different ways and it'll pop right out. It goes out that way. Once you get that out, just get in there and wipe out whatever you can by hand. But you really can't get down in here because this is a rag. Wrap it in some saran wrap or plastic bag or whatever and stuff it in that end so it's a good tight fit. Get yourself some 4x4s and set this up so it'll stand up on it like that. Grab some kerosene or whatever your favorite environmentally friendly cleaning solution happens to be. Throw some down in there. If you're lucky, it won't come out all over the floor. Another quick tip, while you have these things apart, now is the time to check these grease fittings. Make sure they'll actually take grease. And if you still have the old crappy style like this still had in it, throw these things away and get some good ones. Something like that will work fine. Buy a whole package of them. Modern style grease fitting. It's way easier to grease. They have a check valve so the grease doesn't come back out. Definitely a worthwhile upgrade. If you do already have these, make sure they will take grease. And check the inside of that, because not only does that grease the wheel bearing, that also greases between this housing and the axle. There's nothing in here other than the seal to keep that in place. So you're going to want something to kind of buffer that. So that grease comes out through there and goes to the wheel bearing around here. So it's fairly important. You want to make sure you can get grease into it. Alright, we're going to go through and set this thing up real quick. These are the original bearings, so you don't want a lot of preload on them like you would with new bearings. So start with, take a differential, make sure you got the right hand side plug. So yeah, that's the right hand side. Take your right hand belt and throw it on there. I forgot to mark it because I'm a dumbass, so just figure out which way it goes. I'm pretty sure it goes right there. No gaskets. Just put it together without any gaskets. You don't need every bolt in there, just throw every other one in it. It's close enough. Don't snug them down by hand just to be sure. I think these are supposed to be like 35 foot-pounds, so take an educated guess. You want to make sure everything is relatively clean, get your racers good and clean. Then grab your carrier and axles. And to do that properly, you're supposed to disassemble that and just do it with a carrier. I'm not taking that all apart. Like I said, where they're used bearings, it's a little different. You just get a little bit of drag on it and it'll be just fine. Now, the big thing to note with this is do this without the axle seals. So before you put the new ones in there, do it that way. Before you get this in there, put a little oil in the bearing. Same deal over here, put a little oil on that one. Get yourself some alignment studs if you don't have any. Take some long bolts and cut a few off. This will help you a great deal in trying to line up the housing and the gaskets and all that stuff. So just throw a few of them in there. So now we take some educated guesses, and you just pick a couple of gaskets that you think might be the right thickness, throw them on there, put it together, and see how they feel. The best gasket brand, actually probably most of them do, they come with a little list here to tell you how thick each color is. So I'm going to go with fairly thin ones, just because I think the bearings are older and maybe a little worn. So white is 3/1000. Ivory is 5. Let's go with 5. Let's see how that feels. What you want to do is put them both on one side. That way it's easier to manipulate. If you have to change them, you have to pull both bells off. You just pull this one off. So throw them both on here. This is where the studs come in extremely handy. Same spot, I'd say so. And again, check them by hand just to make sure they're. You can torque them if you'd like, if you're. Now, reach in through here and see how this feels. Fortunately, it feels kind of loose. So I'm gonna pull those gaskets out, put the thinner ones in. Hopefully that tightens it up a little bit. The two thinner ones. Hopefully that's going to work, because if not, it doesn't get any thinner than that. Alright, how's it feeling now? That's better. That's pretty good. It's got a little bit of drag on it, but you can still move it fairly easily. But it doesn't freewheel. That's kind of the big thing, is you don't want it binding up and hard to move, but you don't want it just to spin freewheeling either. So I think that's pretty good. Pretty happy with that. So one note on this one in particular, we're kind of SOL at this point when it comes to setting backlash, because you would move gaskets from one side to the other. We only have one gasket on each side. It's already the thinnest one, so aside from, you know, just sealing the housing to the housing, which I guess you could do, just use gasket sealer, not RTV, but actual like gasket adhesive or the gasket shellac. You probably could make the housing seal together without using a gasket on there, I guess. But other than that, you don't have much of an option just to move this thing back and forth. So these things are pretty forgiving anyway, as long as it's not tight and binding or insanely loose. The backlash isn't super important with these. These are kind of a pain in the fact that it's just a lot of taking it apart and putting it back together over and over and over again. So now that we're good on the carrier setup, we're going to take it all back apart. I'm going to put the pinion back in the housing, put one gasket on that side, one gasket on that side, put it all back together with no sealer, and then just see what our backlash feels like. Like I said, we don't have a whole lot of option on that, so I'm sure it'll probably be alright. If it's super loose, we may have to move one gasket over and just use sealant. You know, I'll use like the gasket shellac on the housing itself and see if that seals up. That may be our only option. Hopefully don't have to do that. So I'm going to get the pinion installer set up, get that stuff back in there, and get this thing back together again, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to see how the old backlash feels now. It's actually really, really good. It feels excellent. I'm really surprised. I didn't expect it to be that good. Alright, well, I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. So we're going to bolt it back apart, put some axle seals in it, seal up the gaskets, and hopefully put it back together for the last time. Yeah, we're going to throw our new seals in here. Obviously you want to try to clean out the recess for it first. Take your new seal, the lip faces the oil. So oil is on this side, so the lip faces up. You're going to throw some grease in here. It'll help it stay on the installation tool and also help keep it from ripping when the axle goes through it. You want to put a little bit of grease on the axle as well. There, that should be plenty. Get this installation tool at pretty much every parts place. And just get a piece of, I think it's 1/2 inch pipe or 3/4, I'm not sure. Get something 3 or 4 feet long, and then I bought a little cap, put on the end of it too, give you something to hit. Just throw the seal on. And they go in pretty hard, so you have to give it a few good whacks. Make sure you support the bell so it's not just sitting on the floor. But get it centered and let her have it. You tell when it rings like that it should be all the way in. Pop that out and double check it. If you got long fingers, you can usually get in here and tell if it's seated or not. So that should pretty much wrap up our rear axle. I do need to try to find a nicer set of radius rods. The ones that were on this rear end are also junk. They were all booger welded on the bottom. And it figures I just sold a really nice set, but I'm pretty sure I've got at least one more out in the shed, so let's do a little scrounging for those. When I can find some, we'll get those slung back on, get the torque tube back on it. This thing should be ready to go, except for the brakes. So that is going to be it for this one. Be sure to check back on the next update. We're having a little frame dilemma. I will go into that a little more on the next one, and we'll address that and hopefully resolve that issue. So we'll see you on that one.